Millionaire wanted a baby and invited 10 strong men to her mansion to compete. But one changed everything. The sun had just dipped behind the tall pines surrounding the mansion, casting long golden streaks across the manicured lawn. Inside, crystal chandeliers sparkled, throwing fragments of light onto the marble floors. Every corner of the house spoke of wealth, the kind that made most people's jaws drop in awe. Madison Reynolds, 32, sat on a velvet chaise in her sprawling living room, legs crossed elegantly. Her platinum hair shimmered under the chandelier light, and her sapphire eyes were sharp, calculating, yet there was a strange vulnerability behind them. She was used to getting whatever she wanted, but tonight, it was different. Tonight, she wasn't looking for business deals or fashion accolades. Tonight, she was hunting for the perfect genes. Her assistant, Laura, a petite woman with dark hair pulled into a tight bun, approached cautiously. "Madison, they're all here. The men you invited." Madison smiled, a little too wide, her manicured fingers tapping the chaise. "Good. Let's see who's worth my time, and who's worth my future child." One by one, the young men were introduced. Most were tall, athletic, handsome in the conventional sense, smiling nervously at Madison as if she were a celebrity instead of a woman holding a checkbook large enough to make their dreams come true. Then there was Marcus. Marcus Williams, 24, a recent college graduate with a confident smile and eyes that seemed to see right through the extravagance around him. Unlike the others, he didn't look intimidated. He leaned against the grand staircase, his posture relaxed, hands in his pockets, watching the room with curiosity. Madison's gaze landed on him immediately. "Who's that?" she whispered to Laura. "That's Marcus," Laura replied. "He's different from the others." Madison's lips curved into a smirk. She stood, gliding toward him. "Marcus, isn't it? I hope you're aware of what tonight is about." Marcus tilted his head, a playful glint in his eye. "I think I have an idea. But money doesn't scare me, so you might have to impress me in other ways." The room went silent for a heartbeat. Most of the other men shifted uncomfortably, exchanging glances. Madison felt a jolt, something in him stirred curiosity she hadn't expected. "You're confident," she said, walking closer. "I like that. But confidence alone won't win this test." Marcus chuckled softly. "Is it a test? Or are you just seeing who's brave enough to call it what it is?" Madison paused. His words hung in the air, bold, daring, different. She had offered thousands to attract attention, but this wasn't about money anymore. Something in Marcus made her heart race, a mix of tension, excitement, and an emotion she rarely allowed herself to feel, anticipation. The rest of the evening unfolded like a game. Madison observed, questioned, and challenged. Some men faltered under her gaze, some flattered her endlessly. But Marcus, he stood out in ways she hadn't anticipated. There was wit, intelligence, and an ease in him that made the lavish room feel smaller, more intimate. At one point, she leaned against the grand piano, her voice softer. "You're different, Marcus. You don't try to impress me. That's rare." Marcus met her gaze, unflinching. "Maybe I just don't need to. Maybe I know who I am, and what's real, even in a place like this." Madison's breath caught. She realized, in that moment, that what had begun as a peculiar experiment was starting to feel dangerously personal. The night deepened, and the mansion felt smaller somehow, even with its towering ceilings and endless hallways. Outside, the wind rustled the oaks, and the moonlight bounced off the marble floors, giving the room a silver glow. Madison poured herself a glass of champagne, her hands trembling just slightly. She didn't usually feel nervous, not like this. Marcus remained near the grand staircase, leaning casually, watching her with those dark, curious eyes. He wasn't fawning. He wasn't nervous. He simply existed. And in that presence, Madison felt a strange pull she couldn't explain. "Marcus," she called, her voice steady but softer than before. "Come here for a moment." He descended the staircase with easy confidence, each step deliberate, like he knew exactly how much attention he commanded without trying. "You're not like the others," she said, studying him. "The other men, most of them just want the money. They smile, they flatter, but there's nothing real behind it." Marcus shrugged lightly, a slow, teasing smile forming. "Maybe the others are too busy worrying about your money to be real. Or maybe they just don't know how." Madison felt heat rise to her cheeks. She hated that his words affected her, that they made her heart race. "And you, what's your angle?" she asked, leaning slightly closer. "Are you here for the money too?" He shook his head, his smile widening. "I'm here because, well, because you asked me. And maybe because I wanted to see how this millionaire game works. But money isn't the point. I can tell you, most of these guys? They're playing a part. I'm just me." She looked away for a moment, swirling her glass, feeling something unfamiliar, vulnerability. "You're dangerous," she whispered, more to herself than to him. Marcus tilted his head, catching the word. "Dangerous? I like the sound of that. But maybe I'm just honest." Madison laughed softly, a little breathless. "Honest doesn't usually survive in my world." "Maybe that's why I stand out," he replied, leaning closer so their eyes met. "Maybe honesty is what scares you." For the first time that night, Madison didn't have an answer. She only had the sudden, undeniable awareness that Marcus wasn't just another option, he was different. The kind of difference that could unravel carefully laid plans. From across the room, the other men fidgeted, whispering among themselves, but Madison barely noticed. Her focus was entirely on Marcus, the young man who didn't need to try, yet somehow held the room in his calm, magnetic presence. A quiet tension settled between them, charged and dangerous, like static before a storm. Madison realized she had crossed a line. This wasn't about genetics or money anymore. Somehow, Marcus had gotten under her skin, and she didn't know if she wanted him to leave. She raised her glass, almost in challenge. "Then tell me, Marcus, if this isn't about money, what is it about?" Marcus's smile deepened, enigmatic. "Maybe it's about finding something real, in a world full of illusions." The chandeliers sparkled above them, shadows dancing across the room, and Madison felt a shiver run down her spine. She knew this night was only just beginning, and that the consequences of what happened here could be far more complicated than she'd ever imagined. The next morning, sunlight poured through the tall windows of the mansion, glinting off the marble floors. Madison had already planned the day meticulously, each test, each observation, designed to find the perfect match. Yet, despite her precision, she couldn't stop thinking about Marcus. He had unsettled her in ways no man ever had. The other men arrived, nervous, dressed in crisp suits and forced smiles. They followed Madison into the grand library, where she had arranged a series of challenges, simple physical tests, IQ games, and personality exercises. It was clinical, almost sterile, but Madison watched them carefully, notebook in hand, analyzing every move, every reaction. "All right, gentlemen," she said, her voice commanding but calm. "Today is about compatibility. I want to see who truly stands out. Remember, this isn't just about looks or charm, it's about character, intellect, and instinct." Most of the men tried too hard. They overthought every answer, laughed too loudly at her jokes, or flaunted muscles they thought would impress her. But Marcus, he moved through the challenges with ease, answering questions honestly, observing rather than performing, and approaching each task with quiet confidence. During a puzzle challenge, one of the men, a tall blonde named Ethan, fumbled, frustrated. "This is stupid," he muttered, slamming a puzzle piece down. Marcus looked at him, then at Madison, and calmly said, "Sometimes, the harder you push, the slower you go. Let's just think it through." He placed a piece carefully, then slid it into the right spot. The puzzle clicked perfectly. Madison blinked, her pen hovering over her notebook. She felt a strange thrill, an adrenaline rush, as she realized Marcus didn't just complete the task, he excelled without trying to impress her. Later, during a physical challenge in the mansion's garden, the other men were panting, sweating, clearly competing for her approval. Marcus moved naturally, relaxed, but every step and decision he made seemed deliberate, strong, and graceful. Madison watched from the balcony, heart pounding. "Who is that?" muttered one of the other men, muttering under his breath. Madison didn't answer. She didn't need to. Marcus had already captured her attention in a way the others couldn't even approach. At lunch, she found herself sitting across from him. The other men sat scattered around the table, fumbling with their cutlery, still trying to make an impression. Madison leaned forward, studying Marcus. "You're different," she said again, but this time, there was no teasing in her voice. She meant it. "I don't know if I've ever met someone like you." Marcus smiled faintly, picking up a fork but not touching his food. "Different isn't always bad," he said. "Sometimes it just means you notice things others miss." Madison's lips pressed together. There was something magnetic about him, something that made her pulse race and her mind spin. He wasn't just a contestant in her experiment, he was a force she couldn't ignore. And she knew, deep down, that choosing Marcus, or even just being near him, was going to change everything. The sun dipped lower, casting long shadows over the garden. Madison realized that tonight, something unexpected would happen, something that might make her lose control of the careful experiment she had so meticulously planned. Night fell over the mansion, the sky painted deep indigo. The chandeliers sparkled again, reflecting off the polished floors, but tonight the light felt different, warmer, more intimate, almost electric. Madison had arranged a final evening test for the men, a private dinner, where conversation, charm, and presence would reveal who truly stood out. The other men arrived in tailored suits, all smiles and rehearsed lines. Ethan tried again to catch her attention with jokes. Another, a quiet guy named Blake, kept stealing glances, clearly nervous. Madison watched them all with a professional detachment, until Marcus entered. He was dressed simply, a crisp white shirt, sleeves rolled up slightly, dark jeans. Not flashy, not trying to impress anyone, just himself. Madison felt her breath catch. Every step he took seemed measured yet effortless, a natural grace she couldn't ignore. "You made it," she said, rising to greet him, her usual confidence slightly shaken. Marcus smiled softly. "Wouldn't miss it for the world," he replied. The casual sincerity in his tone made her heart race unexpectedly. Dinner began, the other men fidgeting, laughing too loudly at her polite comments, trying desperately to shine. Marcus, on the other hand, leaned back slightly, relaxed, yet attentive. He asked questions, not shallow ones, but thoughtful, meaningful. "So," Marcus said, glancing around the table, "what's the goal here, really? Is it just a test, or is it about finding someone you respect? Someone you connect with?" Madison blinked, startled by the directness. Most men had been performing, flattering her ego, but Marcus spoke with honesty, not calculation. Her pulse quickened. "It's complicated," she admitted, swirling her wine. "I wanted this to be controlled. Scientific. But now, I'm not sure control is possible anymore." Marcus leaned forward slightly, eyes locking with hers. "Maybe that's the point. Sometimes the things you plan for the most aren't the things that matter." A hush seemed to fall over the room. Madison realized the other men were no longer paying attention, all eyes were drawn to Marcus, though they didn't understand why. He had an aura that drew attention without demanding it. Later, as the dinner wound down, Madison found herself alone with him in the library. The other men had been dismissed, their attempts to impress her forgotten. Marcus leaned against the bookshelf casually, his calm presence filling the room. "You know," Madison said softly, "I offered all of them money, a fortune. And yet, none of them mattered. None of them, until you walked in." Marcus's eyes softened, and he took a step closer. "Maybe it's not about what you offer," he said quietly. "Maybe it's about what you can't buy. Something real, something honest." Madison's breath hitched. She had never wanted anyone like this, never allowed herself to. And yet, here he was, making her question everything she thought she knew about herself, about control, about desire. The night stretched on, silent except for the soft tick of a clock and the faint crackle of the fireplace. Madison realized she was no longer evaluating the men for their genes. She was evaluating Marcus, and perhaps, unknowingly, herself. And in that quiet, electric tension, she knew one thing with absolute clarity: Marcus had changed the game entirely. The following morning, sunlight filtered through the tall windows, casting warm patterns across the library. Madison sat at her desk, scrolling through her notes, but her mind wasn't on the tests, charts, or evaluations. It was on Marcus. He had lingered in her thoughts all night, the way he smiled without effort, the calm confidence that contrasted so sharply with the other men's forced charm. She pinched the bridge of her nose, trying to focus. This was supposed to be a scientific experiment, a meticulous plan. And yet, her heart had betrayed her. A soft knock on the door broke her concentration. "Come in," she called, her voice steadier than she felt. Marcus stepped inside, carrying a single black coffee, his expression unreadable yet warm. "Thought you might need this," he said simply, setting it on her desk. Madison's lips twitched into a small smile. "You're persistent, I'll give you that." He leaned casually against the edge of the desk. "You asked for honesty last night. I'm just giving you mine. No games, no theatrics." Her chest tightened. "And that's terrifying." Marcus raised an eyebrow, amusement flickering in his eyes. "Terrifying? How so?" "Because," she whispered, looking down, "I don't usually let anyone see me. Not like this. Not my doubts, not my feelings. And somehow, you've already seen both." He stepped closer, close enough that she could feel the faint warmth radiating off him. "Maybe that's the point," he said softly. "Maybe someone has to." Madison felt a rush of conflicting emotions, desire, fear, and an unfamiliar vulnerability. She wanted to run, to regain control, to remind herself this was all a test. But part of her didn't want to. Before she could respond, the door opened abruptly. Ethan and Blake, still trying to assert themselves, appeared, faces red from exertion and frustration. "Madison," Ethan said, voice edged with irritation, we need to talk about today's challenges. About Marcus, he's not playing fair." Madison felt a flicker of satisfaction and confusion. The other men's desperation only highlighted Marcus's calm, effortless presence. "Not playing fair," she repeated, her tone icy. Blake fumbled for words. He's too confident. He's different. It's like everything else we tried to do doesn't matter. Madison's eyes narrowed, and a small, secret smile tugged at her lips. Maybe that's because it doesn't. Maybe he's just real. Something you clearly can't be. Marcus didn't flinch. He only stood there, calm, almost serene, while the others struggled to reclaim attention, their bravado cracking under the weight of his quiet strength. Madison realized something dangerous and exhilarating. This wasn't just about genetics or money anymore. This was about connection. Desire. Something unplanned. Something raw. And Marcus? Marcus was at the center of it all. She leaned back in her chair, swirling her coffee absently, feeling the heat in her chest grow. Tonight, the mansion would feel smaller. Tonight, the experiment would stop being a test and start being something else entirely. That evening, the mansion glowed under the golden light of the chandeliers, casting warm reflections across the marble floors. Madison walked slowly through the main hall, her thoughts tangled. The experiment she had meticulously planned had unraveled. Marcus had changed everything. He appeared at the top of the grand staircase, casually leaning against the railing, a small, knowing smile on his face. "You're thinking too much," he said softly, his voice carrying easily through the vast hall. Madison stopped, her heart skipping a beat. "Maybe. Or maybe I'm finally realizing I don't need to control everything," she admitted, stepping closer. Marcus descended, each step measured, confident, yet gentle. When he reached her, he extended a hand, not a challenge, not a test, but an invitation. Madison felt a shiver of anticipation. "You stood out," she said finally, eyes locking with his. "Not because of money, or charm, or games, but because you're real. Honest. Yourself." Marcus's gaze softened. "And you're willing to see that, even when it scares you." They stood in silence, the grandeur of the mansion fading around them. All the other men, all the plans, all the money, it didn't matter anymore. What mattered was honesty, connection, and the spark they couldn't deny. Madison took a deep breath and stepped closer. "Then, no more tests," she said, her voice steady now, full of conviction. "Tonight, it's just us. No rules. No pretenses." Marcus smiled, reaching for her hand. "I like the sound of that." The other men had left hours ago, still trying to process why Marcus had risen above all the rest. Madison didn't care. In that moment, she realized she had found something far more valuable than money, genetics, or perfection. She had found someone who could see her, truly, and someone she wanted to see, in return. The night settled softly over the mansion. Outside, the wind whispered through the trees. Inside, Madison and Marcus stood together, their hands intertwined, the distance between them closing. It wasn't an experiment anymore. It was real. And for the first time in her life, Madison felt a freedom she had never imagined, freedom to love, to connect, and to let go.